the dynasty that restored China, began by suspecting the very society it had saved. From the ruins of Mongol rule, Zhu Yuanzhang did not simply return Chinese rule. As the Hongwu Emperor, he tried to make disorder administratively impossible. Villages fixed to registers, grain fixed to quotas, officials fixed to the fear of the throne. Here, scale was not display, it was compression. Millions of households made legible to a court determined that restoration must never loosen into rebellion. Yet the question is darker. How could a state built to rescue order become so dependent on control that uncertainty itself began to look like danger? One cause of later weakness lay in this early strength authority, gathered so tightly around the throne that obedience could be seen everywhere, and doubt had fewer places to survive. Before the ruins, there was confidence. Before the collapse, there was order. And within that order, the first fracture had already begun.
In early Ming Nanjing, power began with ink, grain tallies, and names. In guarded offices, clerks copied household registers, turning families into lines of labor, tax, grain, and responsibility. The routine mattered more than any single clerk. A name entered correctly could bind a household to service. A name missing, altered, or disputed could trouble the village, the magistrate, and the throne. Zhu Yuanzhang had not come from the palace world he later ruled. He had known poverty, hunger, wandering, and dependence before rebellion carried him into command. Those experiences mattered. When he founded the Ming in 1368, he did not imagine restoration as a graceful return to an older order. He imagined a country that had to be secured against the conditions that had nearly destroyed him. Armies could take cities, but they could not by themselves rebuild a realm. The north held memories of Yuan rule, frontier war, and steppe politics. The south held the richest river valleys, busy towns, and the grain that could sustain a court. Between them ran canals, roads, courier stations, market routes, and chains of officials. If the Ming was to last, these regions had to be bound together every day. Nanjing was the first great center of this dynastic restoration. It stood near the lower Yangtze, where water made wealth visible. Boats moved along rivers and canals. Rice fields spread through lowlands. Markets drew in timber, salt, cloth, paper, ceramics, and grain. The city had older imperial associations, but its practical value mattered more. From Nanjing, the new court could draw on southern resources while sending armies north against the remaining Yuan forces. The Mongol Yuan had not fallen in a single clean moment. Its collapse came through rebellion, military pressure, fiscal strain, environmental distress, and the weakening of confidence between rulers and subjects. Zhu Yuanzhang was first one rebel leader among others. His victory gave the Ming its founding year, but conquest did not answer the harder questions. Who owned each field? Who owed grain? Which household had men available for service? The early Ming answered by counting. In county offices, clerks copied names and checked them against local claims. The yellow registers recorded households, population, and obligations. Fish, Scale registers and cadastral surveys helped identify landholding, land quality, ownership, and tax assessment. The Lijia system organized households into units of mutual responsibility. On paper, the village became legible. In practice, every line depended on local memory, pressure, and the men who held the brush. For ordinary people, the restored dynasty often arrived as a written demand, a name in a register, a grain quota, a labor rotation, a soldier's inherited duty, an artisan's assigned service. Much of this had precedence in earlier Chinese government, but Hongwu gave the system a harder edge. Movement worried him. Luxury worried him. Officials worried him most of all. He wanted settled farmers, disciplined communities, and a court that could detect trouble early. A magistrate could praise the classics in the morning and order a harsh investigation by dusk. The dynasty claimed to restore Confucian order after Yuan rule, and that claim had real force. It revived schools, honored agrarian life, and presented its rule through anti-Yuan legitimacy, moral government, and dynastic renewal. Yet the founder trusted punishment as much as persuasion. He believed corrupt officials harmed the people, and they often did. His attacks on corruption, however, left officials cautious before they were honest. The decisive change came in 1380. After the case of Hu Weiyong, Hongwu abolished the office of Prime Minister and the Central Chancellery. The 6 ministries answered more directly to the emperor. A powerful intermediary beneath the throne disappeared. No servant should stand high enough to threaten the ruler. Afterward, the ministries stood closer to the throne, and the workload rose with them. A strong emperor could drive the system hard. A withdrawn emperor left it stiff and congested. Hongwu's government mixed recovery with fear. It praised frugality. It rebuilt local institutions. It expected officials to serve a moral order. It also punished failure with a severity that later generations remembered uneasily. The early Ming state helped many regions return to stable life after war. Roads became safer. Fields came back under cultivation. Granaries and schools marked imperial presence. Still, the ruler watched his servants almost as closely as he watched his enemies. Outside the capital, recovery was practical and uneven. Farmers repaired irrigation channels. Military colonies supplied garrisons and helped feed soldiers. County magistrates heard disputes, supervised tax collection, and reported upwards through the administrative chain. A market town might see peasants with baskets of grain, monks seeking donations, soldiers passing through, and clerks carrying sealed documents. These daily movements made empire possible. China's size kept resisting design. The Yellow River could flood and shift. The Grand Canal needed labor, dredging, and supervision. Southern grain had to move north. Frontier garrisons needed supplies. Coastal communities lived by trade habits that did not always suit court restrictions. Mountain regions, borderlands, and dense river towns could not all be governed like villages near the capital. The court wrote categories on paper. Local society kept producing exceptions. The Yongle Emperor took the dynasty into a larger public form. His own path to the throne began in civil war against his nephew, and his reign carried the urgency of a ruler who needed to display command. He turned the court outward and northward. Beijing, closer to the steppe frontier and to his own military base, became the main imperial capital. Nanjing remained important, but the center of imperial performance moved towards the old northern danger. This move created a logistical empire inside the political one. Grain, tribute from the south, had to reach Beijing over great distance. Along the Grand Canal, boats gathered at depots. Crews waited for orders, officials checked tallies, and soldiers guarded shipments. In the capital, granary gates opened to receive rice that had traveled through locks, river sections, and warehouses. Beijing's power depended on a vast southern grain lifeline maintained through the canal system. The Forbidden City gave the northern capital its central image. Completed in 1420, it became the ceremonial and political center of Yongle's Beijing. Gates opened onto courtyards. Courtyards led to halls. Halls gave way to more restricted spaces. Rank decided movement. Access could be honor, duty, or danger. The palace did not need to explain hierarchy. It made officials walk through it, across stone, timber, glazed tile, an empty ceremonial space. Yongle's reign also sent Ming power across the sea. Zheng He's fleets sailed from Chinese ports into Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean. They reached India, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea region, and the east coast of Africa. The voyages carried tribute, diplomacy, trade goods, interpreters, soldiers, imperial prestige, and coercive authority when the court judged it necessary. They were not European. Style territorial colonization. They were still power politics on water. Their expense and purpose remained contested. After Yongle's death, the expeditions were suspended. They were briefly revived under the Hongwu Emperor, with Zheng He's seventh and final voyage leaving in 1431 and returning in 1433. Then they ended as a sustained state program. The frontier demanded money. Officials questioned maritime display. The sea still carried Chinese merchants, migrants, monks, and goods. But the court no longer sponsored oceanic magnificence on that scale. For much of the 15th century, the dynasty remained formidable. The examination system drew educated men into service and gave government a shared language of morality, history, and law. Provincial and county administrations connected the capital to local society. Temples, schools, granaries, magistrates' offices, and courier routes gave the state a visible shape. On market days, villagers passed stalls of oil, vegetables, cloth, tools, incense, and printed books. Ming rule had weight in ordinary streets. Its craftsmanship reached a level that still defines the dynasty in the public imagination. At Jingdezhen, porcelain production drew together clay, glaze, cobalt, fuel, kiln skill, court demand, and commercial appetite. Kiln smoke rose above workshops. Labourers hauled materials. Potters watched heat as carefully as any official watched a register. A blue and white bowl might pass to an official storehouse, or move towards merchants and the wider trading world. In the lower Yangtze, towns grew dense with money and taste. Printing expanded access to books. Commercial publishers sold drama, fiction, manuals, moral instruction, and examination aids from shops marked by wooden signs. Woodblocks, account books, inkstones, and folded examination papers belonged to the same urban world. Gardens in Jiangnan arranged water, garden stones, timber pavilions, and calligraphy into private retreats. The old agrarian ideal remained strong in official language. Ming society had already moved beyond it. Markets unsettled the founding categories. People moved for work. Land changed hands. Tenants, labourers, landlords, merchants, and degree. Holding families negotiated around the formal system. Silver gave transactions speed and reach. It also pulled taxation into wider currents of trade. A county office might imagine stable households and predictable fields. Outside its door, credit, contracts, prices, and transport schedules shaped the week. The the single whip reforms showed how far the fiscal world had shifted. Across the 16th century, reformers in different regions worked to consolidate taxes and labor obligations, increasingly assessing them through silver. Zhang later accelerated these tendencies under the Wanley Emperor. The aim was to bring revenue closer to actual economic practice. Implementation remained uneven. Local conditions shaped what taxpayers paid and how officials recorded it. At village level, the change could bite. A farmer might harvest grain and still need silver for the tax demand. If silver was scarce nearby, payment became a harder bargain at market, a deeper debt to a lender, or a tense exchange with the tax clerk. At a stall beside sacks of rice and strings of copper cash, the price of silver could decide whether a household met its quota or carried debt into the next season. A village headman might collect small payments from neighbors who did not all have coin at the same time. Someone sold cloth early. Someone borrowed against a future crop. Someone carried grain to market and returned with less silver than expected. By the time the money reached the county office, the anxiety had already passed through many hands. Japanese silver and American silver, moving through maritime trade and networks such as Manila, helped feed Chinese markets. When supply tightened, distance became visible. A change in maritime exchange could end as a harder payment in an inland county. The coast brought its own troubles. Ming rulers often feared uncontrolled maritime trade because it carried smuggling, piracy, and private power. The Wako crises of the 16th century were long described as raids by Japanese pirates, but the reality was mixed. Many groups included Chinese merchants, smugglers, sailors, and other regional actors. Restrictions on legal trade helped make illegal trade profitable. Anxiety about movement had helped create incentives for movement beyond official control. Officials did not simply fail to notice. They argued, adjusted, fought, and sometimes changed policy. Government response combined campaigns, coastal defense, and eventual accommodation of trade in more regulated forms. On the coast, silver and ships fed the treasury while private networks unsettled officials. In port towns and island waters, the line between merchant, smuggler, and raider could shift with policy, profit, and enforcement. In the north, anxiety took an older form. The steppe had not ceased to matter after the fall of the Yuan. Mongol groups remained mobile, politically divided, and capable of sudden military pressure. Trade across the frontier was essential, especially in horses, textiles, tea, and grain. It was also unstable. Ming policy moved between war, markets, tribute arrangements, gifts, walls, watchtowers, and garrison settlement. The frontier was a working zone of exchange and danger. The Great Wall, most familiar today, belongs largely to this Ming world. Brick and stone fortifications were strengthened across vulnerable stretches when frontier pressure demanded heavier defense. Along the ridges, soldiers watched weather, smoke, dust, and distant riders. The wall could delay movement, support garrisons, channel routes, and give warning. Beyond it, trade, envoys, raids, and negotiations continued. Then came Tumu. In 1449, the Zheng Emperor joined a campaign against Oirat forces. The expedition ended in disaster near Tumu, where the emperor was captured. The shock ran deeper than military defeat. Ming government had placed the emperor at the center of political meaning. Now that center was in enemy hands. Beijing held. Officials organized defense. Another emperor was enthroned. The captured ruler eventually returned. The dynasty survived, but the image of Imperial invulnerability had been damaged. Tumu did not begin a straight decline. The Ming state recovered, continued to govern, and remained powerful. Yet the crisis showed how quickly majesty could become practical weakness when command, logistics, and judgment failed together. Frontier defense stayed expensive. Court politics carried the memory of the capture. Later decisions were made under a shadow that the early Ming had tried to banish with walls, registers, and ceremony. The 16th century added pressure in slower ways. Population grew in many regions. Land became more valuable. Families divided property across generations. Tenants and smallholders faced tighter margins. Local elites used education, money, and family networks to manage tax burdens and protect their standing. County magistrates sat between imperial demand and local reality. They had to collect revenue, maintain order, hear disputes, and report success. The paperwork was heavy. Authority did not always travel as far as the seal. At the center, emperors mattered because the system made their attention precious. A diligent ruler could drive policy, discipline officials, and push reform. A withdrawn or suspicious ruler left the bureaucracy guessing. The Wanley Emperor's long reign exposed the problem. Zhang Zhuang's reforms briefly strengthened finance and administration, but after his death, court politics turned against his legacy. Later, appointments stalled and factions hardened. Memorials arrived. Decisions waited. Court conflict became more damaging because disagreement had few safe channels. Officials used memorials, impeachments, lectures, and moral criticism. Eunuchs, with access inside the palace, could gain influence that scholar. Officials resented. Factions formed around principle, personality, region, and patronage. Some arguments were serious. Taxation, defense, succession, corruption. An accusation could change a career, delay a policy, or deepen silence in the ministries. Outside the palace, Ming culture remained lively. A bookseller in a Jiangnan town might offer a play, a medical text, a moral handbook, and an examination guide from the same shop. Literate families copied poems, bought paintings, and debated conduct. Elite women, within household constraints, wrote and exchanged verse. This was not a society quietly emptying out. Its social energy makes the political strain more striking. War tested that strained center. When Japan invaded Korea in the 1590s, the Ming intervened in support of the Joseon kingdom. That intervention became crucial to sustaining the wider war effort, alongside Joseon resistance, diplomacy, and naval action. Soldiers, commanders, silver, provisions, and transport had to be mobilized over distance. The war helped prevent Japanese control of the peninsula, but it was costly. A regional victory could still leave a treasury thinner and armies worn down. To the northeast, a new power was rising among the Jurchens. Under Nurhaci and his successors, the later Jin, later known as the Manchus, built a disciplined military and political order. They learned from Chinese institutions while maintaining their own forms of organization. Liaodong became a zone of repeated alarm. Ming commanders wanted money, grain, weapons, and reliable reinforcements. Reports moved to court. Requests came back slowly or inadequately. Defeat demanded fresh mobilization. Silver made the fiscal problem more acute. The late Ming state needed it to pay soldiers and meet quotas. Scholars continue to debate exactly how much silver disruption contributed to collapse, and it should not carry the whole explanation. But when flows tightened or values shifted, the effects could be immediate. Less silver meant harder payment. Harder payment meant more debt. A failed harvest did not make the tax demand disappear. Climate added its own pressure. The 17th century brought episodes of cold, drought, flooding, and harvest failure in different regions, within the wider pattern often associated with the Little Ice Age. Local experience varied. No single climate event brought down the dynasty. Bad weather became political when granaries failed. Transport broke down. Prices rose. And tax demands continued. Hunger sent people onto roads. Soldiers without pay and peasants without reserves made rebellion easier to sustain. The late Ming state still acted. Officials were appointed. Armies were raised. Taxes were remitted in some places. Granaries opened when capacity and honesty allowed. Walls were repaired. Local elites were courted or pressured. Frontier war pressed first, and with it, fiscal shortage. Then factional distrust, bad harvests, and local unrest crowded the same desk. Reports from distant counties arrived faster than solutions. Rebellion grew in the north and northwest from conditions no proclamation could settle. Unpaid soldiers, displaced peasants, hungry migrants, and local strongmen moved through the cracks. Lijia emerged from this world. His forces did not succeed because the Ming lacked institutions. They succeeded because those institutions had thinned across too many districts. Seals, titles, and commands still existed. In some places, they no longer carried enough force. By 1644, Beijing was exposed. The Zheng He Emperor worked hard, but effort came late and under almost impossible pressure. He distrusted many around him, struggled to find reliable commanders, and faced rebellion from within while the Manchu threat remained beyond the passes. When Lizicheng's forces entered the capital, the fall was not a clean transfer of power. It was the failure of a system fighting too many emergencies with too little trust. The emperor died as the capital fell. Ming rule in Beijing ended, though Ming allegiance did not. Loyalist regimes continued in the south. Officials, generals, princes, merchants, monks, and families chose between resistance, accommodation, flight, and survival. At Shanhai Pass, Wu Sangui's alliance with the Manchus helped open the way for Qing forces to enter Beijing and defeat Lizicheng. The transition was a contested remaking of authority across a wounded country. The Qing inherited more than a captured capital. They inherited Ming offices, fiscal landscapes, literati culture, canal routes, and palace spaces. The Forbidden City remained the seat of imperial rule. The Grand Canal still carried the memory and practice of a state that moved resources over immense distances. Many Ming institutions were adapted rather than erased. The machinery outlived the house that had built it. The physical remains are still unmistakably Ming. Beijing's imperial axis, the palace halls, the tomb avenues, and long rebuilt stretches of the Great Wall all preserve the dynasty's command of space. Jingdezhen porcelain carries another kind of power, finer and more portable. A blue and white vessel in a museum can seem far removed from tax registers and frontier garrisons, yet it belonged to the same world of labor, organization, taste, and circulation. The Great Ming Code also traveled beyond the dynasty. It shaped Qing law and influenced legal cultures in Korea, Vietnam, and Japan. Korea adopted it most directly. Vietnam drew on related legal models. Japan engaged with Ming legal thought through later study and reform. The code set out a vision of hierarchy, family responsibility, official duty, punishment, and moral order. It remained part of East Asia's legal memory. The dynasty began with recovery after Yuan rule. Dynastic, ideological, administrative, and anti-Yuan in its claim to legitimacy. It rebuilt fields, offices, roads, granaries, schools, and armies. It made a vast country visible through registers and supply routes. For generations, that work held. Then society moved faster than all categories. Silver crossed oceans. Merchants worked around restrictions. Frontier enemies adapted. Weather damaged harvests. Court politics grew brittle. The Ming fell through accumulation, not a single blow. Rebellion mattered. The Manchu rise mattered. Fiscal strain, silver markets, climate stress, military exhaustion, factional conflict, and administrative weakness all mattered. Hongwu's fear of disorder did not determine the ending. It did, however, leave later rulers with a familiar instinct to answer uncertainty by tightening command. After the Ming, China continued. Families replanted fields. Scholars served new rulers or withdrew from service. Artisans kept firing kilns. Traders returned when routes reopened. The Qing built its own empire over Ming foundations and beyond them. Yet the Ming left a sharper imprint than many dynasties because its buildings, laws, porcelain, walls, capital, and records remain so visible. They show a state of enormous confidence, built by men who never stopped fearing collapse. The first Ming emperor had tried to make chaos visible before it became rebellion. He left behind a state that watched, counted, commanded, and built with extraordinary power. What remains is not only the palace gate or the wall ridge, but the register itself, a page of names, ruled lines, and obligations, still carrying the quiet ambition of an empire that wanted uncertainty to stay within the margins.